I've been driving through Louisiana for years, mostly overnight runs, long empty highways cutting through swamp and darkness. After a while, you stop thinking about it and just follow the road. It becomes routine, something you trust without really questioning anymore. That night felt no different at first, just another quiet stretch with no traffic for miles. No headlights ahead, none behind me, just the hum of the engine and the soft static from the radio. It was the kind of silence that feels normal until you start paying attention to it. I remember thinking how empty the road felt, even for that route. Not just quiet, but completely still, like nothing had passed through there for a long time. The kind of feeling that makes you check your mirrors, even when you know there shouldn't be anything there. About an hour into the drive, I saw something ahead near the shoulder of the road. At first, it didn't look like anything specific, just a shape catching the edge of my headlights. I almost ignored it, thinking it was debris or a sign. But as I got closer, the shape didn't change, and that's when I realized it was a person, standing right at the edge of the road, facing toward the highway. No car nearby, no lights, no movement, just standing there like they had been waiting. I slowed down without really deciding to, the same way you do when you think someone might need help. That's not unusual out there. People break down, run out of gas, get lost. But something about this felt different before I even understood why. They weren't waving or trying to signal me, and they didn't react as my headlights got closer. Most people would step back or at least turn their head, but this person didn't move at all. They just stood there, completely still. As I got closer, I noticed something that didn't sit right with me. They weren't looking down the road or scanning for help. They were already looking straight at me, like they had been watching me the whole time. I felt that hesitation, just for a second, like my brain didn't know what to do with what I was seeing. Part of me thought about stopping, just pulling over and asking if they needed help. But something in me said not to. I kept driving. As I passed them, I didn't turn my head or look directly at them. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, trying to treat it like nothing unusual. Just another person on a long, empty road. A few seconds went by after I passed them, long enough that they should have been behind me and gone from sight. That should have been the end of it, something strange but explainable, something I'd forget by the next stop. Then I checked my mirror. They were still there, only now they weren't standing on the shoulder anymore. They were in the middle of the road, directly behind me, exactly where my truck had just been, standing in a place they couldn't have reached that quickly. I felt it then, that sudden drop in your stomach when something doesn't make sense. I pressed the gas a little harder without thinking, trying to put distance between me and whatever I had just passed. The road ahead was still empty, just darkness stretching out with nothing breaking it up. No signs, no lights, nothing to focus on except the lane in front of me. I told myself it was perspective, something I misjudged in the mirror. I didn't look back again. I kept my eyes forward, both hands tight on the wheel, trying to ignore the feeling that something had changed, that the road wasn't as empty as it should have been, even if I couldn't see anything anymore. That's when the radio cracked. It wasn't the usual background static. It was sharp and sudden, like someone had just keyed in right next to me. It cut through the silence, so clean, it made me flinch before I even realized what it was. I waited for a voice, expecting a call sign or someone checking the channel. That's how it usually goes out there, especially late at night when drivers are trying to stay awake. But nothing came at first. Just a short pause, then a voice. "Still driving, huh?" It was calm, low, and clear, not distorted like most transmissions. It didn't sound like it was coming from miles away through a radio signal. It sounded close, like it didn't have any distance to travel at all. I didn't answer. I didn't reach for the mic or change the channel. I just stared at the road, trying to convince myself it was interference, something crossing signals. That happens sometimes, especially in isolated areas, but not like that. Not like a voice that sounds like it already knows you're there. I drove the rest of that stretch without touching the radio. I didn't turn it off either. I just left it on, letting the static fill the space again. It felt easier than interacting with it, like ignoring it would make it stop. I didn't check the mirror again. I just kept driving until I saw lights ahead. Something normal, something real. Traffic, signs, anything that broke the emptiness of that road and made everything feel grounded again. By the time I reached the next stop, everything felt normal. People moving around, engines idling, conversations, the kind of noise that makes you question what happened when you are alone. I told myself it was nothing. Just a long night, a quiet road, and my mind filling in the gaps. But I haven't taken that route again, because out there, on those Louisiana roads, the problem isn't what you see. It's what notices you first. Hello, little ravens. Welcome back to Channel Dread Horror Stories. There's something about roads like that, places where everything feels empty, but never completely quiet. Drivers talk about it sometimes, not directly, but in the way they describe certain routes they'd rather avoid. Not because of what they saw, but because of what didn't make sense afterward. Moments like that don't stay with you because they were loud or obvious. They stay because they don't fit anywhere in your memory, like something that shouldn't have happened at all. And the more you think about it, the less it feels like a mistake. If you're drawn to real accounts like this, stories that sit somewhere between exhaustion and something harder to explain, make sure you're subscribed. There are more of these experiences, and they only get more unsettling the deeper you go. Because sometimes, it's not the road that changes. It's the moment you realize something else was already there before you arrived. I've always trusted the cab more than anything else on the road. Doors locked, engine running, everything sealed off from whatever is outside. After years of driving at night, that small space becomes the only place that feels controlled. That night, I was cutting through a long stretch of Louisiana road surrounded by dense trees on both sides. No lights, no towns, just darkness and the narrow line of asphalt ahead. The radio was on low, just static filling the silence. It had been quiet for a while when the static suddenly disappeared completely. No transition, no fade, just gone. I glanced at the radio, waiting for the signal to return, but the silence stayed. Then a voice came through, clear and close. Stop the truck. It didn't sound like a transmission. There was no distortion, no distance, just a voice placed directly inside the cab. I froze for a second, trying to process whether it had actually come from the radio. I picked up the mic and asked who was there, expecting a normal response. The moment I spoke, the radio returned to static like nothing had happened. That alone should have been enough to ignore it. Then it came again. Stop the truck. Same voice, same tone, but closer somehow, like it was adjusting to me. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I felt something shift inside me that didn't feel like fear yet, just wrong. That's when something hit the side of the cab, hard enough to vibrate through the door. I flinched and turned my head, expecting to see another vehicle or something hitting the truck. There was nothing there, just trees rushing past in the dark. Before I could recover, another impact came from the opposite side, louder and more direct. It didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, like something was moving alongside the truck and choosing where to hit. I started slowing down without deciding to, my focus splitting between the road and the sound around me. The air inside the cab felt tighter, like the space itself had shrunk without changing. The radio cracked again, sharper this time. Stop. It wasn't calm anymore. The voice pushed into the cab, louder and heavier, like it wasn't coming through a device, but through the air itself. I could feel it more than hear it. Then it screamed. The sound filled the cab instantly, not like a single voice, but like several layered together, stretched and uneven. It wasn't something you listen to. It was something you react to, and my body reacted before I could think. I slammed the brakes. The truck slowed fast as I pulled onto the shoulder, my hands shaking on the wheel. The moment I stopped, the sound cut off completely, leaving a silence that felt just as unnatural. I opened the door and got out without thinking. The air outside felt colder, heavier, like the whole area had gone still. I stepped away from the truck and looked around, expecting to see movement or something approaching from the dark. There was nothing. The road was empty, the trees were still, and the silence felt complete again. That didn't make it better. It made it worse. I turned and ran toward the tree line. The ground shifted under my feet as I moved into the forest, uneven and soft in places. Branches scraped against my arms and shoulders, but I didn't slow down. I just kept moving away from the road. The deeper I went, the darker it got, the light from the truck fading behind me until it was gone. My breathing got heavier, my legs slower, and the space around me felt too quiet to be real. I stopped, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting in the driver's seat. The engine was off, the cab silent, and my hands were on the wheel, exactly where they would have been if I had never moved. For a moment, I didn't react at all. I just tried to understand. I looked at the door, closed, locked. I reached over slowly and opened it, stepping out onto the road again. The truck was parked cleanly on the shoulder, perfectly aligned, with no signs of sudden braking or movement. I turned toward the trees. They were still there, quiet and untouched, exactly as they had been before. There was no sign that I had run into them. No broken branches, no disturbed ground. I checked my arms and clothes, expecting cuts or dirt, something that proved I had left the road. There was nothing, no marks at all, like it had never happened. I stood there for a moment, trying to piece it together, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. It felt like something had been removed, not forgotten. I got back into the cab slowly and sat down. Everything looked normal again. Then the radio clicked, soft, controlled. And the voice came back, calm like before. You didn't have to run. I turned the radio off immediately and started the engine. I didn't respond, didn't look at it again, just pulled back onto the road and kept driving. I didn't stop until I reached lights, because whatever was out there at night didn't need me to stay outside to follow me back in. There's something about moments like that that stays with you longer than it should. Not because of what you heard, but because of how real it felt when there was no one else around. And once that line gets crossed, it's hard to convince yourself it didn't happen. If you're into real accounts like this, stories from people who've been out there when things stop making sense, make sure you're subscribed. There are more of these, and they don't get easier to explain. Because sometimes it's not about what you saw or heard. It's about what knew you were there in the first place. I don't usually pick up anyone on the road, especially at night, because that's one of those rules you learn early and don't question again. But that night in Louisiana felt different, and I broke that rule without thinking about it too much. I had stopped at a small, quiet truck stop just past midnight, a kind of place with a few lights and not much else around it. There weren't many people there, just a couple of trucks and one older man standing near the edge of the lot. He wasn't asking for help, not directly, just standing there watching the road like he had been there for a while. When I walked past him, he looked at me and asked if I was heading east, like he already knew the answer. I told him I was going that way, and he nodded slowly before asking if I could drop him off a few miles down the road. Something about the way he spoke felt too calm, like he wasn't worried about whether I agreed or not. I hesitated for a second, but it didn't last long, and I told him to get in. He opened the passenger door without another word and sat down, closing it gently behind him like he had done it 1,000 times before. For the first few minutes, we didn't talk at all, just the sound of the engine and the low static from the radio filling the cab. The road ahead was empty. the same kind of darkness I had been driving through all night. Then he started talking, but not about himself or where he was going, just about the road. He spoke like he knew every mile of it, describing turns and stretches that we hadn't reached yet. He said some parts of the road don't stay the same after a certain hour, and the way he said it didn't sound like a guess. It sounded like something he had already accepted, something he had seen before. I asked him what he meant, trying to keep the conversation normal, but he didn't answer right away. He just kept looking forward, like he wasn't really talking to me anymore, but remembering something. Then he said drivers sometimes see things out there that don't belong, but the real problem isn't seeing them. He said the problem starts when those things notice you back and decide not to stay where they are. Something about that didn't sit right with me, and I adjusted the radio to break the silence a little. The static came through again, but it didn't feel like it was helping anymore. He kept talking like nothing had changed, his voice steady and calm, like he wasn't trying to scare me at all. That made it worse somehow, because it didn't feel like a story. It felt like a warning. He said once something recognizes you, it doesn't need to follow the rules of the road anymore. It can stay close without being seen, and sometimes it doesn't leave when you think it does. By then, I just wanted to drop him off and keep driving, so I asked where he needed to get out. He pointed ahead and told me to pull over near a marker that we hadn't reached yet. But when we got there, I saw exactly what he described. There was a clearing on the side of the road, nothing but an opening between the trees with no lights or buildings. I slowed down and pulled over, keeping the engine running while I waited for him to get out. He reached for the door, but stopped for a moment before opening it. For the first time, he turned his head and looked directly at me, and something about his eyes felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Then he said something that stayed with me. "You shouldn't stop for people out here." I didn't answer, and he stepped out of the truck, closing the door softly behind him. I watched him walk toward the trees, moving slowly until he reached the edge of the clearing. I waited a second, just long enough to see where he was going. Then I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. Out of habit, I checked the mirror as I drove away. There was nothing there. I slowed down a little and looked again, expecting to see him walking or standing where I left him. But the clearing was empty, like no one had ever been there. I told myself it was the angle or the darkness, something I didn't catch in the mirror. That explanation lasted until I reached the next truck stop a few miles ahead. I parked and went inside, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There were a few drivers sitting together, talking quietly, and I joined them without thinking about it. I mentioned the man, just casually at first, explaining where I picked him up and where I dropped him off. I didn't expect much of a reaction, maybe just a comment or a joke. Instead, the conversation stopped. One of the older drivers looked at me and asked me to repeat the location, and I did, more carefully this time. I described the marker, the clearing, everything I could remember. Then he asked what the man looked like, and I described him as best as I could. Same calm voice, same expression, same way of speaking. The driver leaned back slightly and nodded once before telling me something I wasn't ready to hear. Years ago, a driver matching that exact description used to run those same routes. He talked about the road the same way, warned people about things that didn't make sense, and then one night he pulled over in that same spot and never came back. They found his truck later, still running on the side of the road, completely empty. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, no explanation for where he went. I didn't say anything after that, just sat there replaying everything in my head. The way he spoke, the way he looked at me, and the last thing he said before he got out. I left without finishing my drink and went back to my truck, sitting there for a long time before starting the engine. The cab felt different now, like something had changed without me seeing it happen. I haven't picked anyone up since, because I don't think I gave that man a ride that night. I think something else got into my truck and chose the moment it wanted to leave. Some stories don't stay with you. because they were loud or obvious. They stay because they leave something unresolved. Not answers, not explanations, just that feeling that something didn't follow the rules the way it should have. So now I want to know what you think. If you were in that situation, would you have stopped? Would you have picked him up? Or would you have kept driving and never looked back? And more importantly, what do you think was sitting in that passenger seat? If you're drawn to real accounts like this, the kind that don't give you clean answers, make sure you're subscribed. There are more of these stories, and they only get harder to explain the deeper you go. And if you want to keep going, there's another 2 videos on the final screen with more true stories from drivers who experience things they still can't fully understand. Watch that next, and decide for yourself how much of this can really be explained.